I'm a teen mom. I'm a part-time student and a full-time employee, and I run my own business from home. My name is Bethany, and I'm a miraculous mama.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we are a podcast that believes in empowering women through storytelling and education. And we also want to empower fathers. And so today we have a father on the podcast who has just an amazing story of his journey, watching his wife go through a lot and dealing with health risks with his daughter, and just kind of what goes on in the mind of a father behind the scenes. And he's an ambassador from the March of Dimes, and his story is so powerful, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear it today. His name's Carson, and his story is just really, really incredible. And the March of Dimes is such an amazing organization, and we're going to tell you more about that as well. And they do focus on the health of moms and babies, and they came into his life at just the right time, and he just has a story of overcoming, and his passion and his positivity are contagious. He has, again, just such a powerful story, and you can just hear what he went through in his voice as he tells it, and how it's so important to build community when you're going through stuff, how it's so important to have that surrounding you, which is what the March of Dimes did for him, and how we never have to face anything alone. So I'm so excited for him to share his story with you. So I'm going to go ahead and get him on. All right, everyone. I have KJ Carson here. He's an ambassador with the March of Dimes, and he has an amazing story that he's going to share with us. And he has a lot of information about the March of Dimes. I'm really excited to learn, because I did not know how much that they were helping out women and babies and families. So it's really cool, the work that they are doing, and KJ got to experience it firsthand. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I guess where the beginning starts, maybe 2 days before our daughter is born. And my wife was complaining of just some tiredness and so forth. And we were really fortunate because the situation that we had for her health care included a midwife. And so that midwife had given us a card where if something didn't seem right within let's just call it a clockwise hour, someone from the midwife team would get back to you. So I said, okay, well, once we get back to our home, which was about 90 minutes away, let me know how you feel. Maybe your medicine, my wife's medicine had just run out. And so I thought, okay, maybe at the worst, you'll need a refill to kind of, because your body was depending on this medicine for your morning sickness. Mm-hmm. So my wife wakes up the next day and she's like, I can't see virtually at all. Can you call the number? And so I'm like, okay, wow, I've never known it to be this. So I hit the pause button on that part of the story to tell from the father's perspective, and I think every father should probably map out a route, a couple of them to get to the hospital. And at the time, we're in the Washington, D.C. area. And if you know how just absolutely ridiculous traffic is in the D.C. area, yeah. I hadn't done this yet.
Yeah.
So after calling the midwife, they called back within about 25, 30 minutes and said, come into the hospital. We're like, okay, absolutely. This is what I'm thinking. We'll get prescription for more medication and so forth. So I'll pause that part before we get to the hospital to say that my wife has been the epitome of healthy eating, not overindulging, had always been on her medications, has never been a smoker of any kind. I can't even get her to drink even the sweetest of wine. So she clearly observes just virtually all the tenets of what a healthy mom should be. But then when we got to the hospital, it just seemed like we were there a little bit longer than expected. And turns out that my wife ended up with a syndrome called HELP. It's an acronym HELLP. One way more people would know about is preeclampsia, but it's a severe case of preeclampsia. And so my wife's blood pressure shot through the roof in the high 200s was the top number. And we were just told, we have to take the baby today. And so my wife was only 29 weeks pregnant at the time. And so our daughter was born 2 pounds, 1 ounces, 2 pounds, 1 ounce, and was in the NICU for 114 days. She had a Category 4 brain bleed and born with low-scale cerebral palsy. My wife did not have a chance to hold her own daughter for about 4 days because of the level of magnesium, if I'm correct, that was in her system. And I was able to see my daughter because of the time that she was born and because the visitation hours in the NICU, which were kind of split in 2 times, were about to start. So I was able to see her briefly for a little bit. But our daughter Sarah was in the NICU for 114 days, and it was just very tough to touch our daughter through a glass partition or plexiglass, just getting her to reach our thumb and, grab our thumb or grab our finger. But what was really fascinating about being in the NICU were the other families and how kind of the NICU is kind of this bubble of life where it doesn't matter what your walk is, what your beliefs are, what your status is. Everybody's there for the same reason. Their baby can't go home right away. And so it kind of becomes a small dependency in a way because you look forward to seeing the other families, even though you're hoping, just like everybody else, that they can go home today with their child. And so the March of Dimes was there for us when Sarah was she's now 8, when Sarah was moved from one hospital next to the Pentagon over into an area of Fairfax, Virginia. The March of Dimes had a kind of like a thing for families where you can stop by. It wasn't anything mandatory. It was just a way to let someone know or let you know that someone's there if you had any questions that you didn't feel like you could ask a doctor or one of the nurse practitioners or one of the nurses that are in there. Let's just say they dealt with kind of like the mental health side of it. If the NICU was the physical, the March of Dimes was there to help address some of the mental. And I know for my wife, who could speak better about this, but I know that it was something as simple as providing my wife a journal, because as a husband, and kind of in a joking way, husbands are just notoriously known for like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And it's like, I'm not okay anymore because you keep asking me. But from a serious standpoint, I just didn't know which avenue to walk down in terms of trying to get that communication with my wife of trying to understand why our child wasn't home. And during that time when our daughter was in the hospital, literally an act of God, a freak of nature happened where there was an earthquake that hit the East Coast, and it was like a 6.0, and I happened to be over at the hospital, but trying to let my wife know, like, hey, look, don't get out here. We don't know how bad things are, even though nothing bad happened at the hospital. But it was like, okay, there's an earthquake. Are you okay at home? I'm going into the hospital as people are coming out. And so just the many of those different things that were going on at that time while our daughter was in the NICU, the March of Dimes was able to provide even something as simple as a diary to my wife for her to be able to get her expressions and her thoughts out. Again, probably one of the things that helped a lot, and what I've learned even from the situation is, sometimes the foods that you put into your body can exacerbate some of the stresses that are going on that you're never really prepared for. So I really think that one of the blessings in everything that was going on was that my wife had already had kind of a conscious thought of what she was putting into her body, or not overstacking the foods into her body, which, I would have no problem. I know there was one time she was like, I'm craving mashed potatoes from KFC and I want a taco from Taco Bell. And I was not going to ask, do you want to eat this right now?
Right.
It was just like, okay, I'll be back in 10, 15 minutes. Is that enough time? And she'd say, also get one of those green Mountain Dews. I'm like, okay, or the light blue Mountain Dews. I'm like, okay, you're really in a zone. But it wasn't an everyday thing. And I think because that wasn't an everyday thing, it allowed some of the mental to be able to permeate and be able to translate to the paper for her.
Right.
For me, and I would recommend this to any husband or father who's going through the same thing. Try and find some things that you know may bring smiles to others during your free time. I happened to start donating food to a food bank at that time. In fact, that's exactly where I was, around the corner from the hospital when the earthquake hit. And so, but it gave me a sense of being appreciative in spite of the things that are currently happening with me at that time, or with our family at that time.
Mm-hmm. I think that this is an appropriate point to share that today's episode is brought to you by March of Dimes, who I'm very happy to be partnering with. The March of Dimes, as many of you may already know, leads the fight for health of all moms and babies. They support research, lead programs, and provide education and advocacy so that every baby can have the best possible start in life. March of Dimes is partnering with the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, to generate awareness among women of childbearing age, families, and healthcare providers about things that they can do to help prevent birth defects. Please do take some time to find out more about the March of Dimes at marchofdimes.org/mamas. That is marchofdimes.org/mamas. Okay, let's get back to our interview.
And so Sarah would go through a couple of more challenges, but the one thing that my wife and I came out of this was, and it's truly amazing, is suddenly you do not become intimidated by health terminology or communications to the point where we wanted to be as much as an asset to the medical professionals that we possibly could. So even though I don't have a PhD in anything medical, I did feel like I had graduated from something that, as time would go on into the later years discussing Sarah's health situation, I wouldn't be overwhelmed with the different terminology or what was to be expected. And it prepared us for when Sarah got home and the things that we'd have to expect, that, hey, some of the bouts of screaming may be a little more intense because we are dealing with a neurological situation, but your disposition and how you handle the situation is going to help in her development. And so in that regard, the March of Dimes, I think we've historically known it for different things from 50 years ago. But once health and the healthcare system or anything involving health comes into your immediate home in life, there are two things you can do. You can either absorb it and try and take the best possible steps you can. They're not always going to be the right ones, but they'll be at least somewhat educated ones, or operate in fear. And we chose the former, not the latter. And to fast forward to when Sarah got around to about 3 years old, she was doing physical therapy, and it was this exercise to help her kind of learn how to get up and down a slide. The idea is learn how to kind of go up a slide and then come down the slide and so forth. And so as she's going through this process, as we're helping her up the slide, we'll never forget this for the rest of our lives, is she said, oh, Sarah would be wheelchair bound if it wasn't for her disposition. And we were kind of thrown because we weren't expecting to hear the human realm from a medical perspective. And so almost to the point, you're like, what do you mean? He said, well, she could easily be wheelchair bound if she felt like, or was given the thought process of that she cannot do, or she cannot be, or she will not achieve. And so we've never put that on her. And then even for herself, when she was starting to walk, she had a walker and just refused to use the walker. And my wife tells me one day that in the hallway she hears the small voice saying, "Get up, get up, get up." And it was Sarah pushing herself to get herself up so that way she can walk without a dependency, even though we were comfortable with her having this walker to try and assist her with walking. So to say that she had zero to do with the walker, that's absolutely not true. But to say that she didn't spend more than 90 days to 4 months with a walker, which she probably should, or by all measures and accounts, should have been using a walker extensively. So a lot of that we trace back to the March of Dimes, because if we could not adjust our worry into some type of written apparatus, at least for my wife, it then gave me an opportunity to say, okay, how do I make the household adjustments so that way by time Sarah comes home, we can adjust to that. And so I'll go back to when Sarah came home. So after Sarah was in the NICU for 114 days, she'd come home, and that first night was kind of tough because I have an older daughter who had a birthday that same day about 200 miles away. And so there was this kind of tug and pull inside of me saying, wow, I have two daughters. One's coming home, but I've been home every day with her. And then I've got another daughter who's not physically with me, but how do I show her that, A, one daughter is not more important than the other, and two, that birthdays only come once a year. And so literally I made a overnight trip that literally had me back within 18 hours. So literally leaving the hospital, making sure they were all okay, the baby went to sleep, getting in my car, driving to get to the birthday party that night, sleeping until about from like midnight to 5 that morning, getting back in the car and getting back in time for the return doctor visit for that, the 24 hours to visit the doctor.
Wow.
And so just by doing that, looking forward now, it's contributed to the health of our family completely. And so back to when Sarah comes home, we discover that she has some more issues. She would end up being legally blind in both of her eyes, but we didn't know this because she had trained herself to be audio-centric, meaning she would use her ears to dictate which way she would need to turn herself. And so just believing that, okay, this is another challenge, and we're ready to accept that challenge because, I think the one thing that the March of Dimes does a great job of is acknowledging those mothers who have had children but lost those children. And so when they have their annual walk, at least here in Boston, it's always around Mother's Day, and I think that's very, very intelligent designed because it's still allowing those moms to still be recognized as mothers. And, we're very fortunate that we didn't lose Sarah, but we also know that part of our campaign and our mission is to also recognize those that may have lost a child, that they will always be a mother, even if that child is not physically here.
Yeah.
And so our daughter is just an absolute bundle of joy. It would turn out that she's going through these eye tests with her eye doctor, and one day we get a phone call, and I remember I was taking the phone call because by this time my wife is back to work, and so that's tough at the time. I'm at work. I'm at home with Sarah, and he's ready to tell us that she's not going to see like traditional children will see. And I remember telling him, I said, well, my child can move her eyes like in a joystick motion. And he said, the child that I saw? Yeah, the child you saw. He said, okay, well, let's bring her back in here like a couple days. I have to see this for myself. And this is when we would only find out that, according to him, that she was not seeing at all. And so her eyesight had started to kick in. So she had eye surgery on both of her eyes. And the day that we took her in for her eye surgery, and this is another portion of it, is, what's on paper doesn't always match what you see in your face. And we remember meeting the nurse that morning, and she said, she's flipping through papers. She's like, this is the girl that's in for the surgery this morning? We're like, yes. She was just like, she doesn't look anything like what's in her charts. And so she had the eye surgery for strabismus. For a while, she was going through the eye patching, and then we remember when she finally put a pair of glasses on for the first time, and she just said, wow. And so I say that because wow is what the March of Dimes has been to our life.
Yeah.
I'm a professional broadcaster for a living. I've lived around the country. And so there are many different causes that sometimes that, like, hey, you get behind this, or you get behind this, you get behind this. And while they're all great causes and they're all for great reasons and the avenue is for it is perfect, but when it hits your life, it doesn't matter if this is what you do for a profession or not. It's your life. And if we're going to use the best practices possible for our daughter to assimilate into society, then it is incumbent on us as a family to share our story, our talents, our gifts, our whatever is needed for that person to say, okay, wow, this is day one in my life. We're 8 years in. Mm-hmm. It turns out when I got to Boston, I didn't know. One of the first calls I made was to the March of Dimes to say, look, I'm here. My family was still in North Carolina at the time, but I'm here to help. And so going into the second year, being asked to be an ambassador was not something that was on our radar. It was just like, look, we're here to help, and whatever you need from us, you have. And so when we were asked to be the ambassador family, I hadn't realized that the director's son was a grown man and had gone through this. And so it was like, wow. So now even for myself, we're going through all these things with our own child, now starting to talk to people who have grown children. And so now there's a curiosity of me is, how does your child do dressing themselves? And what about them working? And because these are all things that you have to think about as a parent, especially later in life. And so with my wife, who ate correctly, didn't smoke, didn't drink, had a midwife, we still had a situation that just came out of the blue. And so I guess I would say, and I would never tell anyone, is just like, if there are things that you can take care of, there are less things that you may have to worry about when it comes down to the date of the birth of your child. And so healthy moms and healthy babies is the theme for the March of Dimes, and that is our goal, is if there's anything that we can do, we can learn, we can share, we can display, that every mom has a chance, a 100% chance, and that's the goal, a 100% chance, just the same way that polio was eliminated, that a mom can go into a hospital and leave that hospital with a healthy baby and her health intact as well. And so where sometimes stories that are told are kind of like, hey, this was going on dietarily, or this was going on in terms of societal things that they were doing. When I tell you that my wife is like a church mouse to all these things, and it can still happen. But I do believe that some of the things, some of the victories that we've been able to have not been trying to wean my wife off of smoking, or you got to cut down. Those are conversations we never had. But still, I have a premature child that was born 2 pounds, 1 ounce. Mm-hmm. And so anything that can be done to get you to a path of success, I highly encourage as a dad, so if you're smoking, that's got to go. It should go before you even know that a child is on the way. Mm-hmm. The alcohol use, as a person who's in their 40s, these were things that were not known. But as science and information has come along, I think it's only beneficial for us to at least be able to take that information in and really apply it, because, we want our child to have the best life possible. And just some of those small basic things, especially in your younger years, is going to help tremendously. And what's taken in by us does pass on to our children, especially as moms. Mm-hmm. There was a story of one woman who was in the NICU who, it was the most unbelievable thing I'd ever heard, where usually the placenta and the umbilical cord is used to feed the nutrients to the child from the mother. But she was having the inverse happen.
Oh, wow.
And so now her life was in danger, and clearly the baby's life was in danger as well, because you had a reversal going on. Now, I don't know what their health or lifestyle was or anything like that, but I tell people who don't understand sometimes that the most dangerous time in any woman's life, potentially, is giving birth.
Mm-hmm.
It's giving birth. And so anything that can get as many healthy children and as many moms healthy as well because of that near-death situation, I would definitely say if you're smoking, I mean, I would be shocked to even think that, that's still something you have to tell someone, but absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Drinking, why take the chance? Why take the chance? Because, like I said, my wife didn't do any of these things. I can't even now with an 8-year-old child, I can't get her to have that's just never been her lifestyle, and things can still go left.
Right.
And so I know that this month is really just a concentration on birth defects. And I would say for those who may be facing those, it's don't let the defect define you. But also, if there's any way that you cannot contribute to it, that's going to be so helpful because, you're going to love that child no matter what.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of my child being any different. I wouldn't, as crazy as it may sound, I wouldn't change anything about what we went through, what she went through, where we are today, because we would have never met with the March of Dimes. We would have never, it was my wife who actually started the campaign for our family to say, this is what we're going to do. And so now sometimes I kind of jokingly tell her, I'm like, okay, I'm running the ball, but it's such a family celebration, our family extended. So our goal is to be able to say, can we change the face of disability through our child, through our efforts? Technology is so amazing, and it gets quicker every day. I'm of an age where I remember when telephones in the home did not have call waiting. And though I'm not an 85-year-old man that didn't invent the phone, but I'm here to sit here and say, wow, not only does the phone have call waiting, but it's in your hand. It can go wherever you want. You can use that same phone to call multiple people. And that's the wonderful thing about technology in the medical field. The March of Dimes, of course, after we're Ambassador Family for that particular year, sometimes there are requests that come to speak on behalf of the organization. And I remember we were invited to speak at a medical facility where they handled, let's just call it higher-level scientific stuff. And at the conversation, because it was interesting, they wanted to know more about my daughter. So I'm just giving the spiel about our life, kind of what I'm doing here. And their first thing was just like, hey, I want you to tell my team about Sarah. This girl was absolutely fascinating and everything. And I was just like, wow. But, and I'm trying not to get so emotional about it because, I don't want to start crying on the podcast, but it's the goal. It's the goal for someone to say, tell us about your child. Tell us about your story. Tell us about how you saw things through, what it was like to go into the woods, the uncertainty, the visits to the hospital. I still say to this day to my wife, the best thing about the NICU, the second one she was at, was it was open 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So if it was 2:00 in the morning and I couldn't sleep because that was normal, I'm heading over to the hospital, and I'll go from 2 in the morning to 8 in the morning, and then here comes my wife, got herself some sleep, and we're switching. And so, again, with the March of Dimes, it became now, these people are my family, and because they saved my family. And so, it's interesting, when I'm preparing to talk to you guys, I'm like, wow, Regina doesn't smoke. She can't even spell marijuana. Trying to get her to drink. I mean, at our wedding, we had like non-alcoholic champagne. That's literally who we're talking with, and a person who literally, when we go out to eat, perfectly cuts a straight line in her food portion, asks for a to-go box before she's even finished, and then takes the rest home, where, as a good husband, I usually eat it within 36 hours like every husband does.
Right.
And to know that she still had challenges, it's like there is no perfect scenario, but if there are some things that you can check off, because it's really affecting the baby. And that's where everything, it's kind of like, it's like getting off of it's like riding down the highway or an interstate. Mm-hmm. And let's say you're driving from Boston to Seattle. Technically, you only need to stay on one road. But on that one road, let's call that life, you've been going at whatever speed you want to. But now you got to get off at Fisherman's Wharf. You got to slow down. You have to observe. Is there a curve ahead? What does the merge look like when I have to yield? Do I have to get over several lanes, right? Because for thousands of miles, you've been able to kind of drive it the way you want to. But when you get to that exit, things kind of have to slow down. And so that exit is our child, right? So we had to observe the curb, getting ready to merge into this new life. We had to check the lanes to see, were we mentally good to now merge into traffic? Do we know where we're going? And sometimes I don't know is not a bad answer, mm-hmm. because at least the word no is somewhere in the answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love, though, that you brought up just even some of the health stuff, because it doesn't matter if you're a perfectly healthy person. There's so many things that can still go out of our control, especially when it comes to birthing, and there's a lot of unknowns. So being able to be like, okay, I know that I took the best care of myself that I could. Right. There is some relief in there. And it was so awesome that the March of Dimes was able to then provide kind of the mental relief for your family. And what is it like? Huge. Yeah. And what's it like for you, I guess, as an ambassador when you meet these other families and they're sharing their stories with you?
You know, it's like one world. It's like, there's a song from the Police called One World, or Bob Marley as well, but One World is enough for all of us. And it literally feels like one world. Everything else goes out of the window. Everything else goes out the window because there is a connectability and a relatability that goes directly through your child. And it's usually through their child as well. And usually conversation starts, how many weeks was she? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's, because like I said, as I mentioned earlier, you start to learn technological terms that you're like, okay, wow, a baby at 36 weeks, coming out at, a baby at 20, I think it's like 26 weeks, that's one of those judgment calls that they're having that conversation with you. And so, you're like, wow, this is a child that's 26 weeks. You could totally relate because you understand how much development happens just in those 3 weeks between a child that's 26 weeks and my child that's 29 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so those experiences with other families and with you never forget them. They always ask about, how's your daughter? How's your wife? How's so-and-so? Oh my gosh, they're getting bigger. Especially when we have the yearly walks, it's really a family reunion. More so than anything else. Even though you may not remember everyone's name, you remember the children, you remember their parents, you remember their stories that they tell you, and it's more of therapeutic for me, because while I'm on the other side of it and now raising the child, and raising our child, it's just always going back and saying, wow, these people also had virtually code red situations like us, mm-hmm. and we're all standing. And so that's nothing short than the word of blessing at these events. And so whether it's been the galas in the past or the walks or some of the nights that we do with the Boston Bruins here in Boston, it's just really just one of those it's like we're excited to see each other. Because there's a piece of us when you walk into the room that's no mystery, and in a digital age, that's really great. That you can walk into a room, and from a person-to-person standpoint, they know something about you that they can relate to immediately, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so amazing that there's just that kind of brings you all together. And I mean, you hear it in your voice, just that sense of passion for the people who you have connected with and the unity in your stories, even though every single one's different, that brings you all together.
Well, I think ultimately, the medical is still going to continue in your life, right? There are going to be challenges that come along later on. But for me, it was, okay, how do I get my child to the best possible health care in the world? I didn't know how I was going to do it. I got a call to come work at a radio station, happened to be in Boston. So I was like, okay. Once I started shifting my mind, because if we're teaching our child to use every power that is already in them to, whether it's, hey, I'm going to show you how to brush your teeth differently, or, okay, here's what we're going to do to music so that way you can get a rhythm, so that way you can be developmentally independent for yourself and things, even if it means that's how you count it in your head. Even if it means, hey, we're looking up the effect of blueberries on neurons in the brain and synapses. You know, these are things I didn't go to college for. But as you move forward and you say, okay, how do I get her into the best possible situation that she can thrive long term, despite what different environments our families have been to or been in and lived in and so forth. So with Boston and Children's Hospital, they do amazing work. I mean, it's just, absolutely fascinating to go into a hospital and one of the people working there who might be seeing you, and they say, you don't know Dr. So-and-so, and you're shaking your head no, because, you're in the hospital with your child, and you figure any person, doctor, they're like, no, this person is like the most world-renowned person in hydrocephalus. And they just happen to be here weekend doing clinicals with students. And you're like, okay, they want to take you on as your patient. So the genesis of that, literally, was the March of Dimes giving my wife a journal, because it allowed her to write out her feelings and her, not I don't want to say expectations, but the best possible scenarios. And I've never seen the journal. But if you're one of those that believes that when two people become one, you can feel that spirit say, okay, I've got a new mission. So if it meant coming back to Boston 20 years after I'd lived here and worked here, then you say, okay, this is the reason why you were here 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this is why you're here now. And so it then becomes, hey, it's not really just the March of Dimes thing you make yourself available to. You start to care about pediatric issues, or you start to care about disease issues that might be delegated to a particular region of the world that may affect you, or medicines, or even the cost of medicines. All these different things now become part of your jargon, and it's just been the way the March of Dimes have opened their arms to us and our family coming here has been beyond a shock. Literally, which started in North Carolina with my wife saying, hey, I want us to get involved with the walk this year. This is the first year that Sarah we can have Sarah out there. Like, absolutely. That ended up becoming the day that my wife drops off the donation money that we had raised. She ends up meeting the person who was in charge of that location. That person asks us to lunch, asks us if we want to be the ambassador family there. Then the next year I'm here in Boston. And then a year after that, in Boston, they ask us to be in the ambassador family here. So I would have never envisioned that it would move that fast. But I do know that this is our life mission and that we're not going to stop until we get the word out in any way possible. If there's a person who's hearing this and says, wow, I didn't realize that having, a glass of wine would do damage. Absolutely. Or, hey, I might take in, tobacco products. Absolutely. You're putting yourself behind an 8-ball. And so anything that and opioid use, unfortunately, which is a national problem. And that may be even a harder message to reach, but we're also probably talking about the most damaging of these three.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to come from a place where, hey, my wife pretty much got a 100 on her checklist, prenatals, the whole 9, checkups weren't missed. Nothing was skipped over. And I'm here to tell you that even, as I mentioned before, even with that, things can go left. And even when you start getting into economic situations and so forth, there are a lot of different stressors that you may not necessarily be able to control. But if you can control what you can control, you will give your child that much more percentage of coming in healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that the mission of March of Dimes, like I'm learning so much, but that it is about leading the fight for the health of all moms and babies, because I feel like the statistics in the United States can be a little daunting when it almost seems like a lot of things may not be on your side or for.
Yeah, the birth equity thing is the complete shocker.
Mm-hmm.
After so my work with the March of Dimes here in Boston and Greater New England is now beyond walks and so forth. I've been able to get back and see behind some of the numbers in just terms of where the mission is going, and sometimes your mouth will just drop.
Yeah.
You will say, like, wow, this is stuff you would expect to see in some severely underdeveloped countries.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, wait a minute. No, this is just in these particular zip codes. And so the awareness, I think, is another part of our mission, which is to know that, hey, there is someone who is here for you. There's another tool that's available to you that you may not have known about, but is specifically looking to get to you. So that way you can be pointed in the right directions. You can get the correct information, because I don't care who you are or what your walk in life is. When you have another life in you, and I've never had that, but I've seen it with my wife. But I've experienced it where in one exchange where my wife used to have this thing where virtually almost at a same exact time every day, I would talk to Sarah through the belly to the point my wife would be like, Kenneth, like she is going absolutely crazy. It's like, because she loves her dad.
Mm-hmm.
But also those things would matter too when she's in the NICU, or when she's having, when her activity of her hyperactivity is going to another level. That, okay, it literally goes back to talking to her before she was here. And so every mom I know, I don't think there's ever been a mom that's never had that talk with their baby. It may have been only once. It could be all the time. So having that talk is an easy way to say, what would you tell your child not to do if they were having a child? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's so important in terms of we all try to be superheroes in our own lives. And my wife is kind of she does kind of put a cape on, and that's part of her persona. But it was this that had us to say, wait a minute, what if we really ingest in our life what is happening? Because we're not the first, we're not going to be the last. But if you know that I have a platform and we have this mission and we have a child who is here because of this mission, then it's everything in our power to try and get the word out, high and low, unfortunately. It really should be on one street, but there is a high-low factor. And how do we get that equity to make it everybody's on Main Street, where everybody has the same chance and the same opportunity to have a healthy baby, and for moms to come away healthy as well?
Yeah, that's so amazing. And for people who are listening to this, in what types of situations would you encourage people to reach out to the March of Dimes?
Honestly, as soon as you know that you have a baby on the way, because the information, while I don't speak extensively for them, they don't provide medications or anything like that, but they will always provide some form of information that applies to where you are in your pregnancy. So if you remember in school, we were always told, look, if you have a project due on, let's just say, 3 weeks from now, do not start that project 18, 19 days from now and expecting to produce something great. And it's the same thing with the March of Dimes. So as soon as you have a question, do not worry about contacting the March of Dimes, because they'll do one of two things. They'll have the answer for you, or they can point you in the direction of where you're going to get the best answer for what you're looking for. And so that's why if I go back to when I was asked to speak at this place, and the guy who owned the company was like, "Hey, I want you to tell about Sarah and her life, and because I'm really getting my group really excited for the walk and for the donation this year." And so after we finished talking, I apologized to him because I didn't know from what angle I don't want to say supposed to be there, but it was like, okay, I know how to speak, but when he asked to come back to talk about my daughter, it was like, I don't need any notes. I don't need to see a presentation slide. I don't need to worry about the PowerPoint moving in time. I can talk about this with my eyes closed, turned upside down. And what it turned out, without even me knowing what they did, it turned out that their field dealt directly in what my daughter has. And that only is because of my work with the March of Dimes, but because of the literature that we received from the March of Dimes slowed so many things down. So true story, my daughter with hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain, most people would know that term. We had become so relaxed and comfortable with the medical field and with the information that we were able to look over that my daughter would have spinal fluid removed from a reservoir at the top of her brain. And so while that was happening, I remember the neurosurgeon at one point said, you may be one of the most comfortable patients I've ever met in my life. And I told him, I said, well, I work in this kind of high cutthroat industry, that has nothing to do with my child. So I'm used to high levels of stress at rapid paces. And so I was at the point where I was comfortable holding my child still while they're putting a needle into her head and removing spinal fluid. And the reason why was because the mental was okay. I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Because the March of Dimes were like, hey, look, you belong here just as much as the people who are watching over your children. Or the information that would let us know, like, hey, here are some of the support groups that are where you are. You won't have to go an hour and a half or 2 hours away, potentially. Here are the people who are right here near you are. And if you have any questions, here's a number you can call, or here's an email you can reach out to. They were right there. And so back to your original question, when would be the best time for a person to reach out to the March of Dimes? As soon as they have a question, especially when things are going on in your head. If it's a medical question, go straight to your primary care physician, or call the necessary steps, as they would tell you. If it's an emergency, call 911, go to the ER. But if it's to like, what do I do? Or I need to know about more resources, or why am I feeling this way? That question right there. Why do I feel this way? Is the question that prompted us to be that magnet that just kind of went zip to the March of Dimes. They weren't on our radar before that. It literally came down to, why am I feeling this way, and I don't know how to get these feelings out. It was a Wednesday. They were coming through on a Wednesday. Just the mental anguish, especially for families, if you're in the NICU and take the hospital food. My wife and I literally started to say, this one had better pizza than the last one. You come on Tuesdays, the chicken salad's pretty good. It may sound absolutely crazy, but it's one less thing to take away the mental anguish that goes on of being in a hospital and literally having hospital cafeteria food every day, you know, because you're there 18 hours out of the day. You know, sometimes or 2 12-hour shifts, literally. And so, but the March of Dimes being there in this room on a Wednesday, and it's optional. They don't come knocking on the NICU door saying, hey, come on down. You know, there's a little sign in the NICU says March of Dimes here, like 8, like noon to 2 in room 202. And so you're like, okay, I think literally went over there to say, okay, maybe they've got something different than the cafeteria food, just by chance. And it wasn't, and, I don't even remember them having, like lunch food. But they had that journal. And that's what my wife needed.
Yeah.
As simple as a journal with the March of Dimes on the front of it. It allowed me to not have to ask, are you okay? Did I do something wrong? Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? It allowed me to just take a breath and allow her to write out all of her feelings and emotions. So it wasn't about, my wife didn't have to go to them about like, okay, what should I be doing? And I'm worried about the prenatals or what do I do? Or, I'm feeling, it was just something as simple as, if you need to write out your feelings, here's a book.
Yeah. If you guys
and here we are.
Right. And you have such a powerful story to share. And it's crazy that it all just kind of started with that journal, but it is so important to be able to not feel alone or isolated in these situations and in motherhood. And especially when situations may go differently than planned, it's so easy to feel alone, even if you're surrounded by doctors or your significant others or
especially then, because like I was saying earlier, there are so many terms that are going around you, and most of us are not medically inclined when you're in there. So you're hearing all these terms, like what is the not the Billy Rubin, it's the Brady. When the Brady goes, when it drops down to, I think it's below 60, or when it drops down to like in the 60, when the baby starts to Brady, most people know it as just like the beep, 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 or when it goes boop, 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 boop. You don't know what that is. But over time, things start to slow down. And like I said, the March of Dimes literally is there to slow down your mind for what you know. And because of that, as that medical information was coming into us and all these different terms and terminologies, suddenly that was slowing down as well, too. So the March of Dimes allowed for our lives and our brains to slow down as new parents. And because of that, now when we're being talked to in the NICU, we're now like, okay, we know how to absorb some of these things because, for my wife, the journal, is able to write down those feelings and get them off. So now when the medical staff is talking to us, it's not that we were any less attentive, but now suddenly you're picking up on things. And even later, as Sarah would get older, and seizures are par for the course with her life. But even saying, hey, wait a minute, just mentioning something simple to a pediatrician, and they're saying, oh, yeah, that's absolutely correct, suddenly reduces her amount of seizures, goes back to being able to have your mind relaxed to absorb the medical information that was coming in when you're at the NICU, because the March of Dimes was there to allow you to know that you weren't alone and completely understand what you go through.
Yeah, absolutely. If for anybody listening, you can just go to the marchofdimes.org, and I will have all of the information up with the interview as well. KJ, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And you just really dove in deep and shared so much of it with us. And you can just really hear your passion and what the March of Dimes is doing is so important, because educating moms is so important right now in our country, and also giving them the support that they need. We really need to be nurturing motherhood, because it can be overwhelming. There's so many different things that come with it. So just to have a resource that's kind of a go-to, their website has tons of information on it. Like KJ was saying earlier, you can find a place close to you for meetups or for a support group, or there's tons of resources and information online for you guys to just have at your fingertips. So it's an amazing resource. And I learned a lot about it because I honestly didn't know too much until I was kind of researching a little bit to interview you. But even just talking to you, I learned so much about it. And also you can find on there, if you guys want to participate in a walk in your area, or you want to donate, all of that information is on the March of Dimes website.
Well, let me tell you guys, thank you. To be at this point, to have this discussion with you guys, I never imagined it, but I could see it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I could see it because I see it in our child. Just the same way that March of Dimes was there for us, we are there for our child. Now, that may sound crazy, but again, way back in our conversation, when my daughter's 3 and we're being told that because of her disposition, she's not wheelchair bound. And God bless those that are, because some of them, they never have a chance beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
My dad says, he's like, that girl is a miracle. And I'm like, well, the world is a miracle,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just honored to be part of it, but I cannot ignore where the genesis of all of this, what's kind of shaped me to be a better husband, a better dad, to slow things down. What was the root of that for me? And that was the March of Dimes. Giving my wife a diary, as simple as that. So there are many causes that are out there. But what is a guarantee in this world is that moms are having babies,
mm-hmm.
and they don't always go 100% smoothly.
Yeah.
So if there are any guys listening, I would say just always know that if your significant other is having a child, that she is walking into probably the most dangerous time in her life without it being societal, right? That it's not because you live high on cliffs or you're sky. No,
yeah.
she's trying to have a child, and she could die trying to have your child. And so to try and be a voice any way I can, if there's a guy or a couple that hears this, don't try to do it alone. The March of Dimes will gladly give you the information you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and just this part of your heart. And for the people listening, again, I will have all of the information up, and it's just amazing to hear that this resource is out there that genuinely really cares about the health of moms and babies. So thank you again so much, KJ, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been less than I don't know what I could say, but I've been very honored.
His story is just so incredible, and it was just so awesome talking to him. And you can just hear again how much the people who came into his life at the right time and helped him through things mattered, and how he wants to do that back for people by sharing information and partnering with the March of Dimes for the health of mothers and babies. And it's so important to spread that education. But again, I also don't want to forget about the fathers. I know the health of mothers and babies is so important, but so is the health of the fathers. And there's some amazing studies out there and awesome research that talk about this too. And I know that this month is Congenital Heart Defect month, but one crazy statistic is about congenital heart disease. And for fathers who have a history of alcohol exposure, the risk of their children being born with congenital heart disease increases by 44%. And that's even if you're having a few beers a day. If you research it, there's great information on it. There's a study by Berkeley there was an article written in 1991 about it, and then it just kind of went unknown. But they do recommend for the health of your children that men stop drinking 6 months before trying to conceive, because they're finding out more and more just how important the sperm is and that the sperm matters in the future health of your child. So don't forget fathers, and that they need to be taking care of their health. The women, we already have so much on our shoulders, and doing the best that we can in that. So we need the father's help as well for healthy babies. It's very important. So there was also a study about men who smoke marijuana, and it puts the woman at risk, a higher risk of miscarriage when the man is smoking marijuana. So that stuff does go in your sperm, and it does affect the baby and the mom. So it is super important for the men to be taking care of their health as well. Sperm health matters too. What a great episode. I know that there's a lot of information in there. Don't forget to check out the March of Dimes website. It is a great resource. And if you are looking for that community, you can find people in your area as well. But also, don't forget to join our Miraculous Mamas community. Our Facebook group page is awesome. The women in there are just amazing, and I love them so much. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram. We always have information, on the guests on there, and what we're going to be talking about and stuff like that. I always try to post in the Miraculous Mamas Instagram stories just fun mom memes or facts or statistics or just informational bits. So don't forget to check that out, and also to check out our Twitter page and repost things that I share on there. That would help spread it for sure. But thank you guys so much for listening. Next week, I have Tara LaRock on. She's created this amazing app for moms, and I cannot wait for you to hear her story. She shares her journey of postpartum depression and why it's so important, again, to build community around mothers and to mothers. So it's going to be such a great episode. She's a friend and just such an amazing human being, and genuinely has a passion to help women. So tune in next week for that episode. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I hope you're having a great month and a great year. And definitely reach out to me if you have any questions, or if there's certain people you want to hear from or topics for discussion. I would love to hear from you guys. Have a great week.